I almost did not submit the application. I sat with my cursor hovering over the send button for 11 minutes. I counted because something in my chest kept telling me this was too big, too close, too dangerous. Mace Industries was not just any company. It was the kind of place where people like me did not last. Not because of talent, not because of skill, but because of what I was, and what I had spent the last 4 years making sure nobody could prove. I hit send anyway, and 3 weeks later, I was standing in a hallway on the 32nd floor, wearing my best blazer, 2 scent-blocking patches under my collar, and a version of myself I had rehearsed so many times it almost felt real. Almost. My hands were steady. My face was calm, but underneath all of it, my heartbeat was doing something embarrassing, fast and loud and completely out of my control, like it already knew something I was pretending not to. The assistant at the front desk told me to wait. I waited. I read the plaques on the wall, the company values printed in clean sans serif font, the framed magazine covers with the Mace Industries logo. And then, in one of those covers, a profile piece, 2 years old, I saw him for the first time. Adam Mace, CEO. 34, built the company from a mid-sized consulting firm into one of the top strategic operations groups in the country in under 6 years. The photo showed him mid-sentence, not posed, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking at something outside the frame. He looked like someone who never stopped thinking, like someone who noticed everything. I looked away from the photo. The door to his office opened. No assistant came to get me. No receptionist guided me in. The door simply opened, and from inside, one word came out, flat and unhurried. "Come in." I went in. His office was not what I expected. I think I had imagined something theatrical, floor-to-ceiling glass, aggressive art on the walls, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. But it was clean, functional. 2 monitors, a cleared desk, a single chair across from his. He was seated, reading something, and he did not look up when I walked in. He just gestured toward the chair across from him with 2 fingers. I sat down. For a moment, he kept reading. Not rudely, it did not feel like a power move. It felt like he was finishing a thought, like interrupting himself would have been wasteful. Then he closed the file, set it to the side, and looked at me. I had prepared for a lot of things in that interview. I had prepared for standard questions, for stress questions, for behavioral questions. I had practiced my voice, my posture, the exact way I would smile if I needed to seem confident without seeming nervous. I had prepared for almost everything. I had not prepared for his eyes. They were slate gray, still. And they held something I could not name. Not coldness exactly, but a kind of careful attention that felt like being read rather than seen. Like he was not looking at my blazer or my resume or my rehearsed expression. Like he was looking at something underneath all of that, something I had not consented to show him. "Jaylen Carr," he said. My name in his mouth sounded less like a greeting and more like a measurement. "Your resume is strong." He picked up the file again, opened it to a specific page. "But you left something out." My stomach dropped. "Your last position." He did not look up from the page. "Listed here as team lead. But your previous employer's public directory still has your role tagged as Omega support lead." He slid the file toward me without looking up. Was that an oversight? Or was it intentional? The room was very quiet. I laughed. Not a real laugh. One of those reflexive, performative laughs that people do when they are caught off guard and need half a second to recover. It came out easier than I expected, and I hated that. I hated how practiced I was at this, how automatic. "That was an oversight," I said. I simplified the title. It was a broad role. He looked at me then, fully, and he did not say anything for a moment, just held my gaze with an expression I could not crack. Not suspicious, not satisfied, just watching. "Simplified," he repeated. "Yes." He looked back down at the file. "All right, that was it." He moved on. The rest of the interview was thorough and direct. He asked about systems thinking, about managing competing priorities, about a specific case study I had included in my portfolio. He was sharp. Every question had a reason behind it, and I could feel him connecting my answers to each other, building something in his head that I could not see. At no point did he seem impressed, and at no point did he seem disappointed. He was just precise, like someone doing very careful work. At the end he stood, extended a hand, and said, "We will be in touch by Thursday." I shook his hand. His grip was firm without being aggressive, warm without being soft. I said thank you. I walked out. I made it to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood there with my pulse at approximately twice its normal rate, staring at the metal doors. The offer came Wednesday. One day early. I accepted it that evening, sitting at my kitchen table with my phone in both hands, telling myself that this was fine, that I had managed harder situations, that 4 years of careful disciplined concealment had prepared me for exactly this. The pills were reliable, the patches were good, my behavioral patterns were practiced enough that even alphas with strong instincts had never caught on. I had worked alongside 3 other alphas at my last company for 2 years without a single incident. This would be the same. I told myself all of that, and then I lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours because Adam Mace's eyes would not leave my head. Not in a way I had language for. Not attraction, not fear, not exactly either of those things. Something more uncomfortable, something that felt like being seen by someone who was not supposed to be able to see you and not being sure yet what they planned to do with what they found. He had not reacted to the answer I gave him about the title. He had not pushed. He had simply said simplified, repeated it once like he was filing it somewhere, and moved on. That was the part I could not stop turning over. Most people, when they accept an answer, relax. Their posture opens up slightly, their eye contact softens, something in them releases because the moment of tension has passed. Adam Mace had not relaxed. He had simply continued, like the question was not finished, like he had just decided to return to it later, in a time and place of his choosing. I knew one thing about Adam Mace before I started. Everyone in the industry knew it. He never caught people in the moment. He waited patient, unhurried, completely certain until they caught themselves. I had walked into his office with a lie I had been carrying for 4 years. And in the space of one interview, in the gap between one laugh and one carefully softened answer, I had already started to wonder if I had handed him exactly what he needed to unravel it. 3 weeks into the job, I had a system. It was not complicated, but it was precise, and precision was everything. 2 patches every morning, one on the left side of my neck, one at the base of my wrist where pulse points ran the strongest. Pills taken at exactly 7:15, always with food, never skipped, never delayed. A specific brand of unscented product for everything. Soap, shampoo, deodorant, laundry detergent. I had researched the ventilation patterns in the office building during my first week, identified which conference rooms had the best airflow, and quietly made sure that my desk was positioned near the east-facing window where the air circulated most consistently. I had a backup patch in my inside jacket pocket, a second one in my desk drawer, and a third in my bag. I had been doing this for 4 years. I was good at it. The routine became almost meditative after a while. Something I moved through in the morning, the way other people moved through brushing their teeth. Automatic, reliable, safe, and for 3 weeks it worked exactly the way it always had. I attended meetings, I organized Adam's schedule, filtered his communications, prepared briefing documents and transition reports and everything else that came with being the assistant to a CEO who moved at the pace of someone who had decided sleep was a negotiation. I was competent, I was invisible in the right ways. And every evening when I left the building, I felt the specific exhausted relief of someone who had performed a very demanding role and gotten away with it for one more day. And then came the Tuesday with the broken air conditioning. It started as a minor inconvenience. Facilities sent a building-wide message at 8:45 saying the central AC unit on floors 30 through 34 was running on backup mode and would be reduced to 30% capacity until repairs were completed. People complained lightly, opened windows where they could, brought small fans from storage. The morning passed without incident. The quarterly review meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. 8 people in conference room B, no windows, sealed walls, a long rectangular table that made the space feel smaller than its actual square footage. By 2:15, the room was warm. By 2:30, it was noticeably warm. By 2:45, the air had the particular still, close quality of a room where too many people had been sitting too long with not enough circulation. I noticed the patch on my left wrist had started to lose adhesion at the corner. I pressed it back down under the table without drawing attention to it. Discreet, quick. The meeting continued. Adam was at the head of the table, walking through projections with the kind of focused, uninterrupted rhythm that made it clear he had run this type of meeting hundreds of times. He was calm, he was precise. He asked 2 questions that made the finance lead visibly recalibrate. He did not look at me. He had not looked at me for most of the meeting, which was normal. My role in these sessions was documentation, not contribution. I kept my notes clean, tracked the action items, monitored the time. Standard, familiar, safe. And then at 2:53, he stopped mid-sentence. Not dramatically, He did not drop his pen, or go rigid, or do any of the things that happen in stories when someone realizes something significant. He simply paused the way someone pauses when a sound at the edge of their awareness becomes suddenly distinct. He set his pen down on the table, slowly, and he took one breath, just one, deep and quiet and almost undetectable. His eyes moved to me. It lasted less than 4 seconds. His expression did not change. He did not react, did not narrow his eyes or tilt his head or do anything that would have been visible to the 7 other people in the room. He simply looked at me for 4 seconds with that same unreadable, precisely calibrated attention, and then he looked back at the report in front of him. "We will continue this discussion with the revised numbers," he said. "Completely even. Same group Thursday at 10. The meeting ended. Chairs scraped back. People gathered their things. The low murmur of post-meeting conversation filled the room as everyone moved toward the door. I closed my laptop and reached for my bag. I was second to last. Almost out. Jaylen. One word. But the way he said it, not loud, not sharp, just placed directly into the air with perfect calibration, stopped me completely. "Give me a moment." The last person filed out. The door clicked shut. He had not moved from his seat. He was looking down at the papers in front of him, straightening them with the unhurried focus of someone who was in absolutely no rush. "The patch on your left wrist," he said. "Change it before the afternoon check-in." The silence in the room after those words was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My throat closed. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my temples, in the back of my neck where the second patch sat. Every practiced response I had ever prepared for this scenario, and I had prepared several, dissolved completely. There was nothing in my head except the words he had just said, and the specific terrible clarity of what they meant. He knew. "Sir, I am not asking you to explain anything." He looked up then, just briefly, just enough to make it direct. "I am telling you the patch is compromised. Change it, and tomorrow bring a backup." He went back to his papers. That was all. No accusation, no follow-up question, no shift in his expression that suggested he was filing this away for later use against me or preparing to escalate it. He said what he said and returned to work as though he had simply noted a minor administrative detail that needed correcting. I walked out. I went directly to the bathroom, locked the stall, replaced the patch with the backup from my jacket pocket, and stood there for a moment with my hands flat against the cold tile wall. My breathing was unsteady. I focused on slowing it down, counted 4 counts in, held for 4, out for 4, the way I had taught myself years ago. He knew. He had known in that meeting, and he had ended the meeting, and he had cleared the room, and he had told me privately. He had not told anyone else. He had not made it a moment. He had handled it the way you handle something that belongs only to the person it concerns. I did not know what to do with that. There was a version of this where it was calculated, where the privacy was just another form of leverage, quiet and patient, being saved for a specific moment. And there was another version where it was exactly what it looked like, someone choosing discretion because discretion was the right thing to choose. I had no way to know which version was true. That evening, just after 7, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A work message, through the internal system, from him. "Take care of yourself, Jaylen." 7 words, no punctuation drama, no additional context. I read it 4 times, then set my phone face down on the counter and stood at the window looking at the city for a long time, feeling something I had not expected to feel, something that moved through my chest like warmth and landed like a warning. The most unsettling part was not that he knew. The most unsettling part was that knowing felt somehow like less of a threat than I had always imagined it would. The company retreat was announced on a Friday afternoon. Mountain location. 2 days, 1 night. Senior staff and key operational roles required to attend. The email was cheerful and corporate in the way those emails always are. Words like rejuvenate and align and strengthen used with the confidence of someone who had never been forced to spend 36 hours being professionally social with their colleagues. I read it twice. I checked the attendee list. And when I saw my name on it, I felt the specific, resigned understanding of someone who had lost an argument they had not even gotten to make yet. I spent the weekend preparing. Not for team-building activities or strategy sessions for containment. A full review of my supplies, a new set of patches ordered for overnight adhesion, pills counted and divided into 2 separate cases in case I lost one. I researched the resort's ventilation system through their facilities contact page, which admittedly crossed a line into behavior that a mental health professional might describe as something worth discussing. But I was thorough and I was not apologizing for it. I packed a bag that weighed slightly more than necessary and told myself the extra weight was justified. The drive up was uneventful. The resort was exactly what the photos had suggested: clean, elevated, the kind of place that used the word curated without irony. The mountains were present in the background in the way that mountains always are, large and indifferent to everyone's professional anxieties. We arrived in the early afternoon. There was a welcome session, a group dinner reservation confirmed for 6, an open afternoon in between. I found my room, and then I found out my room was directly beside Adam's suite. Not nearby, not down the hall. Directly beside. One shared wall, one adjoining balcony divided by an iron railing. I stood in the doorway of my room for a moment, looked at the layout and then closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed with my bag still on my shoulder because some situations require a brief period of motionless recalibration before you can proceed. I proceeded. The afternoon was manageable. There were optional activities, a trail walk, a group presentation about the company's strategic goals for the coming year, an informal networking hour that I attended for exactly the required amount of time before excusing myself with a reference to preparation work that needed finishing. Nobody questioned it. Being visibly diligent was one of the benefits of being good at your job. It gave you a kind of social permission that I had learned to use carefully. Dinner was fine, long but fine. Adam sat at the center of the table and spoke when spoken to and occasionally redirected conversations that were drifting unproductively with the specific efficiency of someone who had a finite amount of social patience and allocated it thoughtfully. He looked at me twice during the meal, once when someone asked a question that touched on something I had prepared briefing material for, in a way that was clearly just contextual, and once at the end of dinner when the group was breaking up, a brief glance that lasted no time at all and communicated nothing I could parse. I returned to my room at 9:30. I changed. I ran through my evening routine, patches checked, medication taken, everything logged. Then I did not feel like sleeping. The mountain air was coming through the gap at the base of the window, and it was cold and clean in a way that felt different from city air, like it had not been processed through enough buildings yet. I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was clear. The mountains were dark shapes against a navy sky, and below the resort the valley spread out in a scattering of small lights. I stood at the railing with both hands on the cool iron and breathed slowly and thought about nothing specific, which was unusual for me and probably indicated that my body was more tired than I was admitting. I heard the balcony door beside mine open. I did not turn around. I looked straight ahead and kept my breathing even and engaged in the specific mental exercise of acting like a person who had not just felt their entire nervous system snap to attention. Couldn't sleep either. It was not a question. His voice was the same as it was in the office, unhurried, even the kind of voice that did not perform anything. He moved to the railing on his side of the divide. I could see him in my peripheral vision. No jacket, sleeves pushed up, a glass in one hand. He was looking at the same view I was looking at. I could not call him sir. He had preemptively removed that option at dinner when he had said, in the middle of a conversation about the schedule, that the formality policy was suspended for the duration of the retreat, cleanly, without making it into a thing. I had not responded because there had been other people in the conversation and a response had not been required. Lot on my mind, I said. Neutral. Manageable. That is not a unique condition up here. He took a slow drink from his glass. Everyone arrives at these things carrying something. A pause. The wind moved through the trees below the railing. Somewhere further down the slope, something rustled and went quiet. Can I ask you something? He said. I kept my eyes on the valley. Sure. Do you trust anyone at the company? The question landed differently than I expected. Not sharp, just honest. Like he had thought about whether to ask it and decided the thinking was done. I trust people to do their jobs, I said. That is not what I asked. Another pause. I turned slightly so I was not completely in profile. Not quite facing him either. The railing between us was low enough that it was mostly symbolic. I trust people at the level the situation requires, I said. That is usually enough. He looked at me then, not the quick, assessing glance from dinner. This was longer, more direct, the full version of that attention I had encountered in the interview room, and had not entirely recovered from since. You have been managing something very carefully since the day you started, he said. I have watched you do it, and you are skilled at it. I want to be clear about that because it is true. But skill at concealment is not the same as being all right. He paused. Are you all right, Jaylen? The question was so direct and so without agenda that it destabilized me in a way I had not expected. I was prepared for implications. I was prepared for careful, deniable pressure. I was not prepared for someone simply asking in plain language, with nothing hidden in the phrasing, whether I was okay. "I am fine," I said. He nodded once. Slow. The way people nod when they are not agreeing but are choosing not to push. "You hold the railing like you need it to stay standing," he said. Not unkindly, observational. "Every room you walk into, you find the exit first. You position yourself so you always have a clear path out." He looked back at the valley. "I notice things. It is not a judgment. I just want you to know that whatever you are managing, it does not have to be managed alone." I did not have an answer for that. Not a real one. I opened my mouth and closed it again and looked back at the valley and felt something move through my chest that I did not have a clean name for. Not relief. Not exactly. More like the specific disorientation of a wall you have been leaning against for so long that when someone suggests you do not have to lean anymore, your first instinct is to doubt the floor. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I think someone should have told you a long time ago," he said. "And I have been waiting to find the right moment since the second week." He finished his drink, set the glass on the railing, straightened up. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow is a long day." He went back inside. The balcony door closed softly behind him. I stayed at the railing for a long time after that. The cold had moved past comfortable into something sharper. But I did not go inside. I stood there with both hands on the iron and looked at the dark mountains and turned his words over and over in my head. The way you turn over something delicate when you are not sure yet if it is real. Someone should have told you a long time ago. I had never once let myself want that. Wanting it felt like a liability, like a door that once opened you could not close again. But standing there in the cold mountain air with his words still settling somewhere behind my sternum, I understood for the first time that I had been wanting it for years. I had just been very, very good at not knowing it. Coming back to the office after the retreat felt like putting on a coat that no longer fit the same way. Everything looked identical. Same desk, same monitors, same view of the city through the east-facing windows. Same coffee machine in the break room that made a sound like a small animal in distress every time someone used the espresso setting. The routine was the same, the work was the same, but I was not the same, and I could feel the difference the way you feel a shift in weather before the sky changes. Something atmospheric, something that had not yet declared itself but was already in motion. I sat closer in meetings now, not dramatically closer, not in a way that anyone would have commented on, but close enough that I noticed it myself and could not entirely explain the reasoning beyond the fact that creating maximum distance had started to feel like more effort than it was worth. I submitted reports in person twice that week instead of sending them through the system. Small things, individually meaningless, but I cataloged them at the end of each day with the specific unease of someone watching their own behavior shift and not being certain yet whether to correct it. Adam did not acknowledge any of it. He accepted the reports, read them, gave feedback. He was present in meetings the way he was always present, precise, economical, attentive, in a way that was different from simply paying attention. He looked at me the same way he always had, which was to say with that quality of attention that I had never fully learned to be comfortable under, and he did not make any of the small changes I was making into a moment. I told myself this was fine, probably fine. Then on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the retreat, I arrived at my desk to find an internal message from HR waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, "Compliance Review Confidential." I read it once. Then I read it again because the first time my brain had simply refused to fully process it. An anonymous report had been filed with the compliance department. The specifics were carefully worded in the way HR communications always are. Formal, detached, designed to communicate serious information while maintaining a tone of administrative neutrality. But the substance was clear. Someone had reported that there was an undisclosed Omega working in a senior operational role without the required designation transparency. The policy was explicit. The implications were not ambiguous. I was being called in for a formal review at 2 in the afternoon. I sat at my desk for 3 full minutes without moving. Then I stood up, picked up my phone, set it back down, picked it up again, and went to see the HR manager directly instead of waiting for the meeting. She was professional and measured and told me everything she was permitted to tell me, which was almost nothing. The report was anonymous. The review was standard procedure. I would have the opportunity to provide documentation and context at 2. I asked because I could not stop myself from asking whether she could tell me anything about when the report had been filed. She could not. I thanked her and walked back to my desk and sat down and looked at my screen without seeing it. Someone knew, or someone suspected, and they had chosen to formalize it, which meant whatever had felt manageable and contained, until this morning had moved into a different category entirely. My hands were steady. I made myself notice that the steadiness because it was the only thing I had control over in that moment, and I needed to know what I was working with. At 11:45, I knocked on Adam's office door. He was on a call. He looked up when I opened the door, registered whatever was on my face in approximately 1 second and said into the phone, "I will call you back," and ended the call before I had fully stepped inside. "You filed the report," I said. My voice was even. I had decided on even. What lived underneath the even was something significantly less composed, but even was what I had and I was using it. He stood, moved to the window. His back was to me, which in the months I had worked for him I had come to understand as something he did when he was choosing his words carefully, rather than avoiding the conversation. Adam. The name came out without the distance of his title and I did not take it back. "If you did this, I need to know. Not because I am angry, because I need to understand what is happening. I did not file it." He turned around, and I saw something in his face that I had not seen there before. Not the careful neutrality, not the controlled attention. Something that had weight to it. Something that had cost him something to carry. "I found out about the report on Tuesday," he said. "Someone in mid-level operations flagged it to compliance without going through me first. That is not how this building is supposed to work." He paused. "So I requested oversight of the review process, which means the file comes through my office before any decision is made." I was quiet for a moment. "Processing. You inserted yourself into the review. I made sure that whatever happens with this goes through a layer that I control." "Yes." He said it simply, without dressing it up. "Because the alternative was letting it move through standard procedure, which means a committee of people who do not know you and do not have context, making a determination based on a form someone filled out anonymously. That is the process," I said. "That is how it is supposed to work." "The process was not designed with good intentions in mind," he said. "It was designed for compliance. Those are not the same thing." I looked at him for a long moment. The city moved behind him through the glass, indifferent and continuous, and he stood in front of it with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes on mine, and I tried to find the angle. I was good at finding angles. I had spent years learning to identify the thing underneath the thing, the leverage point inside the kindness, the agenda inside the offer. I looked for it and I could not find it, and that absence was more disorienting than anything I had expected to feel in this office today. "Why?" I asked. "Just that." One word with everything I could not organize into full sentences packed inside it. "Because you are good at your job," he said. "Because you came into this building carrying something heavy and you did not let it make you less, and that deserves to be protected." He held my gaze. "And because I would rather take the risk of being wrong about my instincts than do nothing and watch something unfair happen to someone it should not happen to." My throat tightened. I looked away because looking directly at him in that moment was more than I was prepared to manage. "The review is at 2, I said. "I know I will be there. You do not have to." "Jaylen." His voice was quiet, but it stopped me completely. "I know I do not have to. I am going to." I left his office. I went back to my desk. I sat down and opened a document I needed to prepare for the review, and stared at the blank page for a long moment before I started typing. My hands were still steady, but something behind my sternum was doing something new, not breaking exactly, more like the specific sensation of a thing that has been held very tight for a very long time beginning, incrementally and without permission to let go. The review lasted 40 minutes. Adam was present for all of it. He sat to my left at the conference table, not intervening, not performing advocacy in any visible way, just there, a settled, unmoving presence that communicated something I did not have language for until later, when I was trying to reconstruct the afternoon in my head. What it communicated was that whatever was in that room was not going to move faster or cut harder than he would allow it to. That was not something he said. It was something he simply made true by being there. The HR panel asked their questions. I answered them. I had my documentation organized, my medical records relating to the suppression protocol, my previous employer's confirmation of my work history, a written statement I had drafted that morning in the 2 hours between Adam's office and the 2 o'clock start time. I was precise. I was composed. I answered everything they asked and nothing they did not, which was a skill that had taken years to develop and which I had never been more grateful for than I was in that room. The panel said a decision would be communicated within 48 hours. Adam walked out with me. We did not speak in the elevator or in the hallway. When we reached the point where his office was to the left and my desk was to the right, he stopped and said, "Go home at a reasonable hour tonight. You have done everything you can do for today." And then he turned left and I turned right, and that was the end of the afternoon. I did not go home at a reasonable hour. I stayed until 8:15 working through a backlog of scheduling conflicts that had accumulated during the review preparation period, and did not need to be addressed that evening, but gave me something to do with my hands while my brain worked through everything it needed to work through. The floor emptied gradually around me. The cleaning staff came through at 7. By 8 the only lights still on were mine, and I noticed without meaning to notice, the light in Adam's office at the end of the hall. At 8:22, he appeared at my desk. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He set one down beside my keyboard without asking whether I wanted it. It was from the place on the corner of the block, not the office machine. I could tell from the cup, and it was the order I got when I went there on Friday mornings, which I had never mentioned to him and which he had apparently registered at some point without remarking on it. "The Hendrix deck needs to be restructured before Monday," he said, pulling the chair from the adjacent empty desk and sitting down. "The third section has a sequencing problem. Walk me through what you were thinking when you built it." I looked at him. "It is 8 in the evening." "It is," he agreed, "and the sequencing problem will still be there Monday morning if we do not address it now." He opened his own laptop. "Walk me through it." We worked side by side at adjacent desks in an empty office with the city dark outside the windows and the coffee getting cold beside us. He had opinions about the deck that were precise and occasionally contrary, and always backed by reasoning. I could follow even when I disagreed with it, which happened twice, and both times we argued it out in the quiet, functional way that people argue when they are trying to reach the right answer rather than win. He was a different person to work beside than he was to work for. Less formal, more direct in a way that felt collaborative rather than directive. At one point he laughed at something I said, not a polite laugh, a real one, brief and unguarded, and it startled me enough that I looked up and he was already looking back at his screen, and there was a slight curve at the corner of his mouth that he was clearly not doing anything about. Around 10:30 my body made an executive decision. I was aware of it in the way that you are sometimes aware of falling asleep from the outside first, observing the process and then from nowhere at all. One moment I was reading a slide and the next I was somewhere that was not the office. Warm and dark and without language, and the transition between those two states had no detectable middle. I woke up to the weight of something across my shoulders. The office was quieter than before. The ambient hum of the building systems, always present, always just below conscious awareness, seemed more pronounced in the specific silence of very late. My neck was stiff. I was on the small sofa against the north wall of the open floor area, which I had not been sitting on when I fell asleep, which meant at some point I had migrated or been moved, and the jacket across my shoulders was not mine. Adam was still at the desk working. The light from his laptop was the only bright thing in the room. I straightened slowly. He did not look up. "You should go home," I said. My voice had the particular texture of someone who had been sleeping. "In a while." He turned a page. "There is water on the table beside you." There was. I drank it. The jacket across my shoulders was charcoal wool, and it smelled like cedar and something underneath cedar that I was not going to think about too carefully. I pulled it slightly tighter. Then I registered what I had done and went very still. "Adam." He looked up. "Why did you know my coffee order?" He held my gaze for a moment. His expression was what it usually was. Measured, attentive, but something in the measurement had shifted slightly, like a lens correcting its own focus. "I pay attention to the people who work closely with me," he said. "That is a general answer." "It is," he agreed. He looked back at his laptop. "You take it with oat milk and 1 sugar and you always get the medium even though the large is a better value, 'cause you once mentioned to a colleague 3 desks over that the large makes you feel like you have committed to something." I stared at him. "I was walking past," he said simply. "I was not cataloging you." "That is extremely specific for something you were not cataloging." The corner of his mouth moved. "Just slightly. Get some more sleep. The decision comes tomorrow, and you should not be exhausted when it does." I did not sleep again. I lay on the sofa with his jacket over my shoulders in the dark quiet of the late office, and looked at the ceiling and thought about a man who had known my coffee order for weeks without mentioning it. who had inserted himself between me and a compliance process that could have ended my career, who stayed in an empty office past midnight for reasons he had explained as a sequencing problem in a presentation deck that, I was now fairly certain, had not actually needed to be addressed tonight. I thought about all of it for a long time, and when I finally ran out of ways to frame it as something other than what it was, I stopped trying. The decision arrived at 9:14 in the morning. I was already at my desk. I had gone home at some point after 1, showered, changed, returned before 8 with the specific alert but hollow quality of someone running on 3 hours of sleep and something that was not quite adrenaline but was doing the same job. My inbox had 14 new messages. I read none of them. I refreshed the page every few minutes and told myself I was not refreshing the page every few minutes, and the lie was unconvincing, but I maintained it anyway because it gave me something to do. The email came from the compliance office. Formal header, reference number, 3 paragraphs of administrative language, and then the determination: case reviewed, insufficient grounds for violation, file closed, no further action required. Senior authorization provided under executive oversight protocol. I read it twice. Then I scrolled to the authorization field at the bottom of the attached review document. Adam Mace, digital signature. Dated the previous evening at 11:47, which was while we were still in the office, which meant he had signed it from his laptop at the desk beside mine while I was asleep on the sofa in the corner with his jacket over my shoulders, and he had not mentioned it once. I sat with that for a moment. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to his office. His door was open. He was at his desk, reading something physical, an actual document, paper, which he did occasionally and which I had always found slightly incongruous with everything else about him. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. His expression did not shift into surprise or preparation. He looked like someone who had been expecting this particular visitor at approximately this particular time. "Close the door," he said. I did. I crossed the room and stood in front of his desk and for a moment did not speak because I was organizing myself, sorting through the things I needed to say and identifying the one that needed to come first. "You signed the authorization at 11:47 last night," I said. "Yes. While I was asleep in the same room." "Yes. You did not mention it." There was nothing to mention. It was a straightforward determination. He set the document down. "You had documented everything correctly. The review found no legitimate grounds. The signature was a formality." "It was not a formality," I said. "Your name on that document means that if anyone challenges it, it comes back to you. It means you made a personal determination on a case that directly involves your assistant, which is exactly the kind of thing that invites scrutiny of your own judgment." I paused. "You know that?" He looked at me steadily. "Yes. So you understand what I am asking. You are asking why I did something that carries professional risk for me when I could have handled it at arm's length through the committee and achieved a similar result." He leaned back slightly. "And the answer is that a similar result is not the same as a certain result. The committee would have taken longer. The extended process would have been visible to more people. And the outcome, while likely the same, would have involved you sitting with uncertainty for a week or more while they deliberated." He held my gaze without apology. "I did not want that for you." Something moved through my chest, sharp and quiet and difficult to categorize. "You keep doing things like this," I said. My voice was steady. I was grateful for the steadiness. "The meeting room, the retreat, last night, this morning. And every time I try to understand the reason, you give me an answer that sounds logical but does not actually explain why you specifically are the one doing it." He was quiet for a moment. The city moved in the window behind him, indifferent and bright in the late morning light. "Come here," he said. I did not move immediately. Not out of defiance, out of the specific caution of someone who understands that certain distances once closed do not open again the same way. Then I walked around the side of the desk. He stood. We were closer than we had ever been in this office, closer than professional proximity required, close enough that I was acutely aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with hierarchy and everything to do with the fact that he was standing there looking at me with an expression that was not his usual controlled attention. It was something more open than that, something that had cost him something to let through. "Jaylen," he said, quiet, "do you remember the interview?" "Yes. When I asked you about the title discrepancy, you laughed and then you gave me your answer, and then you looked away." He paused. "I have thought about that moment more times than I can reasonably justify." My throat tightened. "Why?" "Because everything else you did in that interview was composed, deliberate. You had practiced all of it and the practice was good, Good enough that most people would not have seen past it. His voice was even but not detached. There was something underneath the evenness that was making itself known. But in that one moment, after the laugh, before you looked away, there was something true, something that was not the practiced version. He looked at me with complete directness. I have been trying to earn a second look at that thing ever since. I could not speak. Look at me, he said. I looked fully, without calculating what my expression was doing or monitoring my breathing or running any of the assessments I ran automatically whenever someone's attention was fully on me. I looked at him the way I had not let myself look at anyone in 4 years, without anything between the looking and the being looked at. Tell me something true, he said. Whatever is in your head right now. One true thing. The silence lasted exactly as long as it needed to last. I have been more afraid of you than anyone else I have ever worked with, I said, not because I thought you would hurt me, because I thought you would see me. I held his gaze, and I did not know yet whether being seen was something I could survive. He was very still. And now, he asked. I thought about the retreat balcony and the cold iron railing and his voice asking if I was all right. I thought about the meeting room and one word that had contained a choice he had made without any obligation to make it. I thought about a jacket placed over my shoulders in a dark office by someone who had then returned to his desk without making it into something I had to respond to. Now I think I was afraid of the wrong thing, I said. I was afraid of being seen. I should have been more careful about letting someone in close enough to make me want to be. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically. Adam Mace did not do things dramatically. But it shifted, and what replaced the careful control was something genuine and unguarded and more than I had expected to find there. That is not a small thing to say, he said. No, I agreed, it is not. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. Not the fractional curve I had seen at the corner of his mouth in small moments over the past months. A real one. Full and unperformed and so completely different from everything else I had seen from him that it rearranged something fundamental about how I understood what he had been holding back. I had spent months learning the controlled version of Adam Mace, the precise one, the one who measured every word and held every reaction at a careful, deliberate distance. I looked at that smile and understood for the first time what the control had been containing. I owe you a better answer than the logical ones I have been giving you, he said. Ask me again sometime. When neither of us is standing in an office at 9 in the morning after 3 hours of sleep. Sometime like when? He picked up his document, looked back at me. The smile was smaller now, but it had not left entirely. Dinner, he said. Tonight if you are not busy. Somewhere that is not this building. I looked at him for one more moment. Then I turned and walked toward the door. I am not busy, I said, without turning around. I heard nothing behind me. No response, no movement. Just the quiet of his office and the soft sound of paper settling back onto a desk. But when I reached the door and put my hand on the frame, I was smiling, and the feeling that came with it was not the complicated, cautious, heavily monitored feeling that I had been managing for months. It was simple, straightforward, clean. For the first time in longer than I could accurately measure, I was not afraid of being known. I was looking forward to it.